quite soon.
Good morning and welcome back, everybody. It's right at 10 o'clock. We're going to take a few moments to do some introduction and continue to let people join us throughout the morning. Again, hi, I am Elizabeth Watson, and Jessica Smith is my co-presenter, and then we have Brenda Johansson, who is also another presenter with us who has done some amazing lifting. Just a reminder, this is session in breakout room 1, and this is Cities Accessible Beyond Compliance Assessment Tool, the ABC. So I'm going to kick over and spend a few moments giving the opportunity for you to get to know Jess, Brenda, and I, and why this work is so important to us. So again, I'm Elizabeth Watson. For some of you who were a part of the work that was done by Minnie and or on the panel, I have the privilege right now of being the Interim Assistant Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs and Dean of Students. I also have the amazing privilege of working with Jess and Brenda as the primary investigator in the Center for Inclusive Transition, Education, and Employment. In my previous career life, I was the director of the Center for Students with Disabilities here at the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater for 15 years. It has been an absolute privilege and joy, and truth be told, my career and my opportunities in working with individuals with disabilities goes back for me to about the age of 3 in preschool when I had a friend who was deaf. And as young children do, we didn't think it was a problem. She just taught me to sign and I learned to sign. And not only did our teachers tell us to stop talking, they also told us to sit on our hands because, well, we were just going to talk to each other no matter what happened. As I grew up, I had the opportunity at university, at Stephen F. Austin State University, to become an interpreter for the deaf in educational setting. And that influenced and pursued me in a career working in counseling and psychology, but also in higher education and research with individuals with disabilities and into higher education leadership and service. I'm looking at Jess, is it 7 years ago, 8 years ago? I had the privilege of meeting Jessica Smith at an amazing event that was called Think College, which was a national movement looking at individuals with intellectual disabilities gaining access to universities and college experience. And from there, had the opportunity to start some partnerships with the Department of Health Services on integrated employment. And then 2 years later, the Center for Inclusive Transition, Education, and Employment was developed. And Jessica Smith joined the team, not just as an employee through Department of Health Services, but as the leader of the city team. And we have been nonstop since. Over the last 7 years, we've had the opportunity to work with Department of Vocational Rehabilitation, Department of Labor, Department of Workforce Development, Department of Health Services, Department of Public Instruction, county, city, state partners, national and statewide regional groups focusing on equity and inclusion of individuals with disabilities. And all of this work has led us to where we are today, which is really learning a little bit more about assessment and the importance of assessment of accessibility. I'm going to turn it over to Jess and give her the opportunity to introduce herself and share with us a little bit about her path here.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining our breakout session. Elizabeth gave a wonderful overview of our meeting, and I really do value the importance of storytelling and being able to share the context and journeys and education that leads us here, because it definitely frames our perspective and how we approach disability and inclusion and inclusive employment. So my journey probably goes back to birth, maybe 3, but my recollection is definitely being a young child and being able to go to school with my dad, who was a school-based occupational therapist. And that was a bit more rare in the early 90s, as I recall it. And he spent much of the focus on the early childhood population, and Take Your Child to Work Day and others was a really meaningful opportunity for me to see so many wonderful kids who needed some support in learning and working on their development in that early childhood and birth to 3 programming, and really set the stage for my career journey to be interested in supports for people with disabilities, and really seeing disability as part of a natural part of the human experience, and having value and contributions in difference and in different ways of exploring the world. And so I pursued my education in human development and family studies with a family studies focus to consider how family systems work together to support human development throughout the lifespan, and deepened my interest in people with disabilities and the variations within human development, and the social, emotional context and our culture in which disability is defined. And then pursued a graduate degree in social work. And so I'm a master's of social worker and a macro practice social worker, really looking at systems and policies and how the macro systems work together to shape people's lives. And then looking at the intersections of various systems and experiences and how we work with people and how people engage in the world, because sometimes we're very siloed, and we have education, we have a workforce, we have higher education, we have healthcare systems, but people don't live their lives by those boxes of funding or policies, and they don't live their lives in the boundaries of counties, states, cities. We travel, we move, and thinking about those intersections and how we can blend and create meaningful community participation and quality of life for people across those systems is important to me, and really that ecological systems perspective. And so Elizabeth shared much of the journey in which professionally I worked in long-term care policy for kids and adults with disabilities, including developmental and intellectual disabilities, physical disabilities, adults who have the joy of living long enough to experience sometimes the frailties of aging that result in disabilities, and then had the opportunity to participate in a variety of transition grants and initiatives and integrated employment, and that's where Elizabeth and I intersected, and really had this vision for the niche that is the center that we've created and grown in innovating and creating in the space where systems, programs, policies, funding don't always lay a clear cut and a clear path and a journey. And so we're really looking at that gray area and building and creating new things and finding ways to support people. And so we have grown, and Elizabeth listed many of our partners, local, state, and nationally, and we will get more into some specific projects that we have later on. And so I have a pleasure of a wonderful team across the university, but also our city team. We have 10 professional staff, we have graduate students and student employees, and one of them here today is Brenda Johansson, who has really grown to be Elizabeth and my right-hand woman when it comes to the skills and tools of Qualtrics and survey design and assessment. So I will turn it over to Brenda to introduce herself this morning.
Thank you for that introduction, Jess, and thank you for everybody who is participating here today. As she said, my name is Brenda Johansson. I serve as the Research and Data Manager for the city team, and in practical terms, that really just means I do a little bit of everything, but mostly I think about how to put stuff together and implement things. I come from a background in special education. I began my professional career as an educator who focused on teenagers with behavioral disabilities and a lot of juvenile justice. And my career kind of evolved from there to involve foster care and being a full-time foster parent for a lot of teenagers with a variety of disabilities, and then eventually adopting a child with a disability of my very own. And most recently serving as an advocate in the educational system for youth and young adults with disabilities who are in the foster care system, but also are, trying to navigate the special education system. And all of that has kind of led me to constantly be thinking about how to adapt and include and design systems that really allow full participation by everyone. So thank you again for this chance.
So I think what makes today's presentation and the tool that was developed is this intersectionality of disciplines that comes together. Jess and Brenda and I worked very closely. We evaluated a number of other tools that were out there and just kind of found them lacking. So we're going to share a little bit more of that journey with you. So what to expect during this session? We're going to give a very brief overview of what our assessments. In my heart of hearts, I could geek out on this. I also teach assessment at the master's and the doctoral level. So this is one of the areas that I firmly believe that we always can get better in. We're going to talk about the importance of assessment, the current tools and options, and then what we can learn. As Jess and Brenda and I have all talked about, the learning comes through the storytelling, and we think assessment is a part of that storytelling, but it's also a business analytic tool. I don't want to minimize this. Assessment can have a profound impact, and I see the sunlight is getting on my face really bright, and I may have to adjust my blind because I feel like I'm super bright right now. But assessment is one of those tools that can actually help a small business, a medium business, a community, an educational setting become better, more efficient. And for our business partners and our community partners, it can actually impact your bottom line. Because if you can expand your customer base, if you can make sure that your business is in compliance, you can avoid a lawsuit. Not that that's the reason we go to compliance. Right? We do it because it's what's going to grow our businesses, our communities, and our industries, and make educational opportunities more equitable. So let's take a look. What are assessments and audits? Sometimes when we talk about accessibility, we often call them an audit. And I'm going to put my cap on and go back to 1990 when 30 years ago, the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed. And all of us said, this is great. And then groups of individuals spent the next few years developing what would be these new standards. So just because we passed the legislation, we didn't necessarily know what the regulations or the policies that were going to be that we had to comply with. And there was some really interesting navigation that had to happen. And often when we focus on assessment for accessibility, we're hyper vigilant about the physical design of the space. Is the door wide enough? Are the inches wide enough? But we forget that in a comprehensive assessment, we should be looking at all aspects of functionality. So a way to review multiple points of access. So when we developed this tool, we were really cognizant that we could only focus on the customer experience or we could only focus on the employee experience. But we decided to focus on both. We could focus on physical access, or we could focus on whether or not you had policies and procedures that were integrated. And we decided to focus on all of those. So what you're going to see is a multi-pronged approach to assessment that delivers a more comprehensive, holistic review of your business, your industry, your community space, or your environment. Now, the good old-fashioned ones that you printed and reviewed, these are some of my favorites, and you can still find some of them online today, is that our friends at the Department of Justice created these checklists. And some of us had binders full of them, and we would go through them, and you would get your tape measure out, and you would walk around and measure, and you would check off. Yes, the door is 32 inches wide, check, it is accessible. What we didn't check off was where the door location was it an egress, was it an entrance, was it into a personal space? So we were really focused on a checklist, not an assessment. The other thing is we discovered, and I think even to this day, we're constantly learning misinterpretations of the guidelines. It's really critical to understand that the Americans with Disabilities Act and the American with Disabilities Architectural Guidelines, ADAG, and even the Americans with Disabilities Amendment Act, a lot of those came out as guidelines. So they're the best practice on how you might choose to do something. And frequently these are misinterpreted. So there's a clause called an undue hardship. And folks will say, oh, building a new front door is an undue hardship, so I'm going to use that. And that's actually an unintentional gross misinterpretation of the policy and could lead to high risk and liability for somebody who thinks that is an option for kind of get out of jail free card. So we really want people to understand, when you make a decision, what is the potential risk, liability, and outcome related to that decision. There are some national versions that are pretty spectacular. And I'm going to give a shout out to two. There's the Disability In, which has the Disability Equity Index. And I think I said that right, Jess? Did I get it right? The DEI. And that is a tool for large corporations, typically 1,000 or plus employees, in order to really use that tool and for it to be an effective tool for evaluating and benchmarking within your corporation. The other one is the National Association for Disability, NOD. Also has, and I'm looking at Jess because I just drew a blank on the name, even though I was trying to remember it and we looked at it yesterday. Jess?
I believe it's the Disability Employment Tracker, but I will paste it into the chat function so that we can confirm, because we use acronyms in our world a lot. So I'll make sure that we get it right in the chat.
And that's why I'm trying to make sure that I say all the words that go with the letters that we've identified. So these are really great tools, and they were developed by some amazing national organizations. And they've been working really hard to validate. Some of these tools are 3 and 4 years old. But again, this was to get away from the idea of checklist and to say that if we're looking at assessment, we need to look at it holistically, which means we need to talk about HR policies. So what are the gaps? What we did when we started looking at this is you can still get a checklist and go through and say, yes, I did it. But the checklist doesn't equivalent to what are the outcomes and risks of the choices that are made on that. So if you have to have 2 things that are inaccessible and you're trying to decide which one to move on first, none of those checklists tell you which choice is a better choice to make at the time. And when you look at the national tools, a lot of those require 500 to 1,000 employees, and or that you have multiple business sites or international policies for that tool to be an effective tool for benchmarking for you. So we took a look at the gap out there and decided that for small and medium-sized businesses and communities, agencies, public offices, there really wasn't an assessment tool that existed out there. So that's kind of the journey that got us where we are. Now, why do we do assessment? And a lot of people will jump on and say, we do it for compliance. We do it to be in compliance, and we do it to say we're doing it. But here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to challenge you that you assess, and that compliance is actually kind of the last thing that you're looking at. You want to improve your employment pipeline. And when you do assessment, reviewing and auditing your employment pipeline process, or your HR process, or your onboarding process, or how you provide accommodations to your employees, you're improving your employment pipeline and you're improving the retention of your employees. As Dr. Crowley noted yesterday in our panel, all the research supports that individuals with disabilities and employees have less time off, more company loyalty, more years of services with the company, and that the average accommodation costs under $50 in an employment setting. So this is all about you having the highest quality employees at the lowest cost to you, because the cost of hiring and onboarding a new employee is not insignificant. And in some cases, depending on the type of employee, it could be as much as $10, $15, $20 to $100,000 to bring that employee on. And when you look at, as an employer, how much you've invested in developing, training, and maintaining an employee, you lose all of that investment. So opening your business to new customers. Again, as Dr. Collins pointed out, 1 in 4 Americans identifies with a disability. We're an aging society. So if you want to make sure you have the broadest, strongest, best customer base, you want to be doing assessment to make sure you're tapping into those market shares. All of this increases access to your bottom line. The other thing is that you want recognition. You want to be able to, if you're working with a national organization like Disability In or the state entity Disability in Wisconsin or NOD, you want to meet those standards. If you're working with us through City, you can get recognition that you have gone through this audit process and that you're working on being a disability-friendly organization or a disability accessible inclusive organization. Those recognitions create validity with your customers, with part of your supply chain, and with your employees. In addition to it, it could potentially create eligibility for funding. It can make you eligible for grants and practices. If you're an individual with a disability and you own your own business, you could become Adobe, which is a disability-owned business. I think I'm missing part of it, D-O-B-I, Jess, I'm looking at her again.
Trouble unmuting. It is Disability Owned Business Enterprise, D-O-B-E.
D-O-B-E, and that's our friends at Disability In National. And you can search disability, in, uppercase I-N, Disability In, and we'll drop the link in the chat for you. Actually, if you look up there, the first chat from me to everybody is disabilityin.org resources, the business case, and I'm going to touch on that just a tick more. But Disability In actually has a process where if you're a business owner with a disability, you can get recognized and accredited. They also do it for veteran-owned businesses, and this is the recognition that is through the Association for Persons with Disabilities as well, which is a national organization. And that is part of when you go for federal and state grants and contracts, you can say then that you are working with in your supply chain and in your business plan, disability-owned or veteran-owned businesses. So again, this can increase your opportunity for competitive funding. So what are the tools that are out there again? ADA.gov has worksheets, as well as we're in the Midwest, so that's the ADA Great Lakes organization. There are tools for corporations, there's badges and recognition, and there's a lot of homemade audit tools. If you Google or Yahoo or whatever search engine you enjoy, explore, if you put the terms in disability audit or accessibility audit, you get a lot of different tools that have been created or designed. Most of those haven't been vetted. So what we developed, we vetted, it's weighted, and it's piloted, and we're continuing to grow and refine it as more and more individuals take and use the tool. We use that information and the outcomes on it to continuously improve the tool for you. I think I talked about the gaps a little bit earlier, but I just want to pin down and close the loop on that. National tools require large numbers in their sample. Most do not include educational or community-based environments. There are unmet small and business needs. Again, our community and public entities are frequently left out and they have to just rely on standard federal compliance. Many of these require a membership or a cost for the reports. Right now, our tool is absolutely free to you, as is the report. And businesses and industries, community and educational institutions, you need a way for benchmarking. You need to know where you are so you can say where you want to go and how you can prioritize and move through that. So a lot of the tools, again, if it's a checklist, doesn't help you benchmark what you should be working on next. So I am going to pass over a demo here where it says embedded video by Nick, but I believe we have that. And I'm going to let Nick turn that on. And Brenda, if you want to voice over and be the wonderful voice of the tool that we've developed today, I'd sincerely appreciate it.
Sounds good. Sorry, I'm just trying to get my view. There we go. So what you see here is a video starting the assessment that we've put together to help you go beyond compliance. In this first part, there's just your basic information and making sure that you have whatever information is going to be used to contact you at the end. In the next part, you're going to be asked to simply choose your business sector. This is simply to help us as we continue to collect information to keep track of where the interest is so we can continue to focus our answers. And then the final little bit of information we'll be asking from you is the name of your business, approximately how many employees and locations you have. Once you've done that, there is a page that allows you to open up a separate pop-out window that contains some definitions, because as you're going through these, you're going to notice that we refer to a couple of things around accessibility, technology, standards, and risks, specifically financial, legal, and reputational risks. So using that pop-out window to make sure that if you have any questions as you're answering one of our questions, you have the ability to keep going. So the first section will start asking you some questions around the physical access for your employees. So as you're going through there, it'll help you keep track of which section you're in, as well as how many questions are in that section. And you're just going to take some time to quickly assess how your current level of accessibility for your employees is. Once you finish that, you have a chance to make some notes or some comments if anything came up as you were filling that out, and you want to make sure you're keeping track of that. So those are just some sample notes. There are 7 sections. Once we finish the physical access for employees, it'll move on to the physical access for your customers, or whoever your end users are. So they may be clients, they may be patients, they may be students, but often we have one set of areas and accessibility needs for the people who work for us, but also a separate way for people who are using our services to access. You'll notice I'm kind of moving through the questions quickly because, of course, we want you to take some time to really think through what accessibility features your business has. It's working through right now the technology and web accessibility for your employees. So this will ask you questions around, the actual physical hardware that you have within your business. And I'm showing you that you can go back and reference those accessibility guidelines, as well as, the overall technological accessibility that you have. So software, websites, and then it'll ask the same questions for your customers or your end users, whoever those might be. As you're going through and rating this, you'll notice that there are a few different levels of rating that you can use. So the quickest one, or the first one here, is that it's just unknown, you're not sure. And it can go all the way up to, this is completely designed, implemented. We have somebody who is in charge of overseeing it, of updating it, and of managing it and making sure that we're regularly checking our not only compliance, but accessibility. So once you've gone through here, there's also a feature that if you need to skip a question, you absolutely can, and you can come back to it. And at the end, if you're missing anything, it will prompt you to go back and make sure that you've answered everything in that section. That's to make sure that whatever rating you're getting a full picture of your scores. So once you've finished that, it will ask you if you're ready to submit, and when you are, it will first give you an overall risk exposure overview, as well as your capability by each risk exposure domain, focusing on financial, legal, and reputational. And finally, it'll break down the individual areas, so your capability by each of those areas. And you'll see I highlighted one of the areas that was kind of low. It'll also display your notes. And then finally, it will send you an email giving you your final information and letting you know that a full report will be sent to you within 24 hours. And I think from there, I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth and Jess, who are going to go through a little more slowly each of those pieces so that you have an idea of what each of those mean. So Elizabeth and Jess, if you're ready to take it away.
Brenda, thank you so much for walking us through that kind of interactive process. It's always so helpful to get a sense of what a tool looks like when we're talking about it. And I'm gonna jump back over in here to our PowerPoint, Nick, if we could get that back up on the screen. But the ABC risk assessment, accessibility beyond compliance, we truly believe that if you move to accessibility beyond compliance, your outcomes for your business, for your community, for learning, for educational, your customers, your clients, your consumers will improve. It's a high-level review of basic disability access and compliance, and it's not designed to confirm compliance or provide a legal audit. What it is it's there for you to identify your high priorities and risk areas and give feedback to allow businesses, nonprofits, and municipal entities to develop an introductory plan based on current practices and self-identified risks. Again, Brenda did a fantastic job of walking us through these directions. And our hope is when we get done here today, many of you participating with us will jump in and use the tool and learn with us. And it's important to know that we identified some critical areas. Physical access, which is the one that almost all checklists start with. And it's not just for the customer. Frequently when we do physical access audit, everybody's like, I want to know how things are going to work for my customer. And then we'll say, well, what do the workstations look like for your employees? And they're like, oh, no, I don't care about that. I just want to know, is my front door accessible? Well, if your front door is accessible, but your workstation is not, and you hire somebody who's a wheelchair user for their mobility needs, then how do you employ them? So part of what we were really cognizant about and very thoughtful about is how do we integrate the employees as well as the customer needs into this. The other one is technology and web access. In today's world, if you don't have a web presence, so even if it's a Facebook site, an Amazon store, or your web presence, or your marketing, or if you have a YouTube channel, we really want you to have a sense of what that technology and web access looks like for your customer base as well as for your employees. And then this is an area that we think we're pretty unique on, is we want to look at your human resource and talent acquisition management policies and practices. Frequently, this is an area that's left out of any type of audit and review. Jess, I'm going to pause just for a minute. What are some of your critical thoughts on why looking at human resource and talent acquisition as a review is important?
Thank you, Elizabeth. It is important to consider employees or prospective employees when you're doing a scan of your business or your organization, because, as Elizabeth mentioned, if you're solely focused on your customer base, but you're forgetting about your employees, you are holding you're being short-sighted in your ability to reach those customers. Customers want to work with and engage with, buy from, and utilize inclusive businesses and organizations. You may have employees, in fact, you likely have employees that do have disabilities, may not have self-identified or self-disclosed to you, but in fact could use some accommodations or the recognition of an inclusive environment. And supporting those employees, attracting new employees, and retaining and promoting those employees is important for your customer base as much as it is for those employees. And frequently if we don't take a step back from the job posting or the job interview, I think a lot of us think about how might I interview somebody with a disability and provide those accommodations and hire them. But if your policies and your job descriptions don't align with the essential job functions that are inclusive and not overly restrictive and exclusive, you may post a job opening and be unable to find and attract qualified talent with disabilities because they will read the description and see that it is exclusive or not feeling confident that they will be appropriately included. So it's really important to take a step all the way back to the beginning of your personnel talent acquisition and your human resourcing in this assessment process.
Thanks, Jess. I really appreciate you jumping in on there. I kind of threw her in on that one, but Jess has just a wealth of knowledge in terms of looking at those. We tend to write job descriptions as exclusive tools rather than inclusive tools. So much we could learn, could do a whole session on just how to write a position description in advertising. And then the last big category is institutional business and equity practices. And throughout this assessment tool, we're going to be asking you to reflect upon these different areas and these practices. Again, as Brenda so beautifully showed us, we're going to start off with basics, business information. We're going to provide our definitions and resources to you. We think it's really important that you understand where we're pulling our questions and information from. These are coming from Universal Design Principles that came out of the University of North Carolina, ADAG, which is the Americans with Disabilities Architectural Guidelines, ANSI, which is the federal standards for building codes, and then the state of Wisconsin physical statutes. So when we're looking at physical, we're combining not just one set of standards, but we're actually combining 4 sets of standards, which is also not always how assessment tools are approached. When we look at technology and web access, we're going to be talking about the W3C Web Initiatives, which is the nonprofit organization that sets accessibility guidelines and standards that are now adopted under the federal guidelines of Section 508. So if you receive any federal money, even pass-through federal money, you're required to meet those standards under the W3C or W23, depending on which version of a grant you have, and meet those, or you're jeopardizing your funding, or you're restricting yourself from having access to that funding. And then we look at the WGAC Web Accessibility Standards. So we're going to really be transparent with you on where we're pulling our standards from, and we're going to allow you to go and look at those. With financial risk, we're looking at the definition of increased employee turnover, loss of customers, fines imposed by governing bodies, the imposition of legal fees, other court costs, settlement, the cost of additional marketing and rebranding, and lost time due to crisis management. So often when we're doing financial risk assessment, harm to brand is one of the areas that's kind of alluded to, but not really aggregated or disaggregated into the assessment tool. We really took some thoughtful time to review and look at that because we recognize your brand matters. When we look at legal and compliance, again, this is based on a compliance of filing with one or more of the following bodies. And we recognize that when individuals file complaints about accessibility, there's several tiers in which these processes can move through. Some can be based on local ordinance, governance, ethics boards, professional organizations, the Office of Civil Rights, the Department of Labor, civil action, or other governmental bodies that take oversight. So again, frequently people are saying, does this meet the definition of going to the Department of Justice? Well, somebody actually may not be filing their complaint at the Department of Justice level. So for example, in the state of Wisconsin, there's a whole state statute area that precedes the Americans with Disabilities Act about accessibility and compliance. And it can be within the state level that somebody files a grievance or complaint or a lawsuit against somebody. And many of our small business owners or medium business owners are not going to be necessarily taking that into compliance or into thought. In addition to it, it can be something as simple as a city ordinance, right? I want to have an outdoor seating patio. We are living in a time of COVID. We want to expand our customer base. We want to be able to manage social distancing. So I want to move to outdoor seating. And folks are looking at that and saying, great, I'll just fence this off and throw a few chairs there. Well, you may not have a city ordinance that allows outdoor seating. And if you have the outdoor seating, you also may need to incorporate then the 36 inches of egress and accessibility into it. So you may be intersecting between a city ordinance and a federal accessibility compliance, and you want to find out how you can make that a win-win. So it's really important from the community level through the federal level that we're taking into consideration legal and compliance. And then last but not least, we really believe in your brands. We believe in the work that you're doing, how you are branded, the reputation that we have. We believe that those are critically important. You've worked hard for your business or your organization or your agency, your schools, your governments, your cities to have strong reputations. And we know you want to serve the broadest community. And what we recognize is that it can be as negative as word of mouth or a bad review on our friends like Yelp, all the way up to print or digital coverage, regional, national, or through international press. So there is a bandwidth in where positive reputation and negative reputation can be occurring. And we think that reputational risk is often overlooked in assessment. So as you go through this, Brenda did a great job that you can skip a question. You may need to go back and look it up. That's perfectly okay, because for many of us, this will be the first time we're looking at these types of questions and thinking about it. And so we really want you to know if there's missing answers and give you the opportunity to go back. That's why this tool is a repeat tool. You can go back in, you can revisit. And then you submit your responses. So when you get your response overview, you're going to get risk exposure level overview. And so based on the answers, you're going to get a financial risk, a legal risk, and a reputational risk in each of the categories. And we think it's really important to understand those, because when you look at the intersection of all three of those should help you decide as a business, community, organization, or enterprise, what do I want to tackle first? Where do I want to start benchmarking and improving? We also want you to look at capability. We understand that there are financial, legal, and reputational risk capacities that play into that. And if you're looking at making the wisest financial investment in accessibility, inclusivity, as well as into growing your economic base, it may be that you've been struggling to retain high-quality employees. And so that risk of not having a stable workforce may be worth investing more to broaden and expand the inclusivity of your workforce base. Because if you don't maintain your workforce base, then you don't have quality customer satisfaction. So you may be having to prioritize, what do I want to do and where do I want to go first? So you can think of these like as a grade. The higher the grade, the greater capacity that you're doing. And at no point is any of this grade failing. What this is always an opportunity to improve, grow, and develop. And even if you're at 100%, I would challenge you that that doesn't mean that's where you stop. What you've said is you've set a high standard for yourself, and you want to go through and look at where you can grow and go next. So then an assessment overview. So you're going to get a capability assessment in the area. So based on your answers, you're going to get physical access for employees and customers, technology web access for employees and customers, HR and talent acquisition for employees and supervisors, and overall institutional and business equity practices. So you're going to get a cross-sectionality of all of that information from the answers that we've asked of you. So based on the answers you've given, you might get a report that says your financial risk, you may face a limited risk of around $100. We actually have tried to do some guesstimation for you. And for legal risk, we might talk about small legal or compliance issues. Reputational, you may face limited word of mouth damage that may be mitigated through direct communication and resolution. So we're going to give you some options on how you can explore resolving these areas. Now, again, this isn't legal and this isn't definitive, and we recognize that there's different socioeconomic impacts in different areas. So the same business risk based on your region, we are working on the process of developing that into this, but right now it's kind of a flat estimator. But as we go through and continue to develop the tool, we'll be able to take and regional economic outcomes and inputs into the tool long term and change those risks based on different areas or different types of industry. That's where we want to go. So there's capability of risk exposure. So based on your answers, you might have that your financial risk capability is 62%, your legal risk is 64%, and that your reputational risk capability is 69%. And again, when you get those, what that's telling you is you have some areas that you want to target and improve. And when you look at some of these exposure areas, you want to go back and say, was this in my HR talent acquisition? So what this is telling me is that some of my policies, practices, and procedures in HR may open me up to employee complaints that are valid, where maybe our policies and practices are not enforcing or following or complying, and that this is an area that we can readily go in and reassess through some policy or practice initiatives and bring ourselves into a new standard. And then capability by assessment area again. Based on your answers, here's a quick overview of your company. Again, these are the types of grades that you might be getting out, and these are based on some samples that Brenda put in that were kind of fun. But when you look at this, you might take a look at this and say, wow, our physical access for employees is pretty low, but it's good for our customers. We want to spend a little time, again, assessing to retain our employment base. So we're going to take a look at what we can improve and bring that area up. In this particular example, the technology web access for employees and for customers, again, statistically are writing in a pretty solid area. But wow, again, our HR and our TAM for employees, this is a real area that we want to go in and review policies and practices and see where we can improve. And look at this one, our HR TAM for supervisors is incredibly low, meaning we may not have the right tools and resources in there for our supervisors to be working with their employees successfully, and or our supervisors' supervisors may not know policies and practices in a way and manner that reflects our company's commitment to inclusion. So those are some opportunities. And then if you get fairly significant risks, this is where you're starting to move into $5,000 more due to a loss of customers, where there may be a higher remodeling or mitigation, legal risk, or reputational. And again, those scores are going to show down in the lower quartile, right? We're going to start moving into that. If we think of this as a bell curve, we're out of that 50% and we're moving down. And these are areas where we would want to do a hard look at what is it that we're doing that is creating risk across all categories. And then again, we would go in and work with you, or you could use the report to go in and start identifying. We have some real physical access issues, as well as some technology issues. And I'm going to use a couple of examples. Harvard University went through with their MOOC, which are large-scale free online classes, and it was determined that those were inaccessible and they had to go back in. Our friends at Berkeley got audited, and part of it was related to accessibility technology, the ability to read textbooks and using technology. And when our friends from the Office of Civil Rights got their feet on their campus, they decided to explore more. Berkeley ended up with $37 million in accessibility functionality that they had to improve in access, from curricular access all the way through physical access. They started auditing the buildings and said, wow, you built a lot of stairs. So part of what we want folks to do is have a good understanding of the larger impact. Those are some really big examples. If we look at companies like Target and Amazon, both of them were sued by the National Federation for the Blind for failure to have accessibility through the shopping experience. Amazon and Target were both found to be responsible and had to fundamentally change the interface on how they do their shopping to ensure compliance for individuals who are visually impaired or blind. And there was no financial restitution on those. Both companies then went into settlement with the Department of Justice, but they ended up spending millions of dollars retrofitting some of their experiential software that allowed for the shopping experience to be more accessible. The good news is that as a result of large corporations learning from that, a lot of the tools have trickled down into small and medium-sized business and are far more accessible today. Next example, and I'm looking at the time, we're getting down to about 10 minutes. I want to pause and check. Jess, do we have any questions in the chat box?
We do not.
Okay, I want to remind you, if you have questions, concerns, thoughts, interesting tidbits, or things you want to be able to throw out at a cocktail party, please feel free to use the chat section down below and ask us some questions. So this is, again, a severe risk, and this is over $100,000. We're talking about substantial lawsuit, and we're talking about substantial reputational damage. And we're talking about an intersection of these happening. And again, wow, Brenda, whoever took this assessment really didn't do as well as we were hoping. So they're in the bottom quartile. They're sitting around 5%, 6%, and 5% again. And again, when you look at based on the answers, it's going to come back and tell you exactly based on your answers how your business, your industry, your company, your community, or your service is providing. So you will have completed this. And what I'm really excited about is within 24 hours, you don't have to wait days, months, weeks, or years to get this report back. You don't have to wait for somebody to physically come out. Some of the questions we talk you through, and you should be able to self-assess and do. And you've completed it. Brenda was gracious enough to provide me a beautiful example of what you would get emailed to you. So the nice thing is we're going to provide this quartile map to you, the 100 to 75, 75 to 50, 50 to 25, and 0 to 25. And again, you're going to get your risk analysis. It's going to talk about what the limited risk. Again, a lot of that goes back to low value changes. When you say, my door is only 30 inches, that's not accessible, but a set of $64 drop hinges and a screwdriver can fix that door for you. So that's a really low risk, and we can really work on that. So if your front door is inaccessible, the financial risk to that is low, and the fix to it is really low. Legal compliance, again, you're going to get your dashboard that shows you this. You're going to get your reputational damage. And then we're going to give you something that we affectionately call the low-hanging fruit. So you're going to get specific feedback that's going to help you start to tackle problems. So for example, you note that you have an ADA coordinator assigned, but you don't have any specific authority or plan to manage or update this process. So you may have somebody who has oversight of accessibility, but there aren't sufficient plans or authorities to allow this person to implement it. So we're going to provide some quick fixes. And one is the ADA Coordinator Training Program, which is run through some national organizations that are technical centers. You can also, because we're doing this regionally right now, you could check out the ADA Great Lakes resource and default for some tips and best practices. So we're always going to try to help you build your toolkit for your business, enterprise, community agency, service, or resource to be better, stronger, faster. So that's an example of the report. I want to pause and go back to our PowerPoint and talk about what is the value. And the truth is, this is no loss. For you or your company or your agency or your entity to go in and use this free tool to do a self-assessment, there's no risk, loss, or cost to you. You get the opportunity to learn about it. And it's not just a number. We provide that matrix to you so that you can take a look at access, cost, and risk. It's going to really help you prioritize your low-hanging fruit and what you can act on. And it's going to give you enough information that you independently can go ahead and start making actionable change. And it's going to help you increase your bottom line. If you are a community agency, and we know a lot of us are working on those thread margins. If you're a business and you're trying to expand your customer base or retain or maintain your customer base, if you are looking for those high quality employees, if you're looking to be competitive, to be a pass-through vendor or to join a supply chain, a pipeline for somebody who has a federal contract, you want to make sure that you can answer yes to all of these questions so that you are more competitive and more attractive to join those processes. If you're looking to become a state vendor, some of the questions that you're going to be asked, the Office of Federal Compliance that has oversight of all federal grants that are sent out now requires that agencies and entities, even pass-throughs, that 8% of their employees be identified as individuals with disabilities. It's a minimum requirement. If you don't meet it, you may be excluded from that participation. So if you can improve your talent acquisition and retention of employees, you've already increased your opportunity for funding streams and resources and competitiveness. What are we going to learn from here? You're going to learn some of your business strengths. When you find out that your website is highly accessible and integrated for your customers, you want to market that. You want to expand that. You want to share that. You want to let people know that you're inclusive. You're going to want to frame your language on your website, inviting your customers in. You're going to want to make sure that they know that you want them to have the most inclusive, accessible shopping experience, learning experience, or engaging experience for your online platforms. Again, I can't stress this enough. We're an aging society with 1 in 4 individuals with a disability. Disability is the only marginalized, disenfranchised group that does not discriminate and has no pre-existing characteristics for you to join at any time. So if you are neurotypical, temporarily able-bodied, congratulations. But I want to remind you that regardless of gender, gender expression, race, ethnicity, country of origin, socioeconomic status, educational attainment, regional living, whether or not you'd like to drive a car, ride a bike, walk, and roll to work, you can become a person with a disability instantly. You can be born with a disability, or you can acquire a disability, or you can age into a disability. And disability in itself is not a descriptor of who I am as a person, but more of a restriction or a function within the environment in which we work. And that's part of the intersection of the work that Jess and Brenda and I do. And if you listen to Minnie yesterday and you talk about what is a disability, we need to reframe that disability isn't a characteristic of Elizabeth and who she is with auditory processing disorder, but rather that there are environments or factors that Elizabeth can't control that then create the disability. So as long as I can control volume, ensure that I can see the face of the person that I'm talking to, have spell check, one of these programs like Grammarly, they can help me understand when I'm writing verses versus the verse in a Bible. Because my eyes and my brain don't translate those words. I just see the same word. I see the meaning, not the word. Then I don't have a disability. So the more that we can interact with our businesses to mitigate those circumstances and create that sense of belongingness, your customers become more loyal to you. Part of what's learned on this too is prioritizing for efficiency and ease of implementation and strategy. We don't want to make this overwhelming and convoluted and complicated. You're going to learn how to best support your business based on your information, not a checklist from somebody else, but how you interpret how it is. And again, possible eligibility for tax credits, funding, or competitive business. We want to encourage you to think about becoming Adobe. That is through the process of Disability International, which we linked, as well as the article by Radon or Accenture focusing on the business case for expanding in disability equity and inclusion. And I'm going to turn it over to Jess to bring us home on this because we've got about 2 minutes and I went a little bit long, but I'm really passionate and enthusiastic about this. Because we're your partner in this, we want you to know that the Center for Inclusive Transition Education and Employment, while we're providing a free tool for you, we also have another variety of services that we think are important for you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Your passion is evident, and even working with you on this project and this tool, it's been enjoyable to listen to you describe and make the case for using it. And again, the business case. There are lots of people with disabilities, people in Whitewater, people across Wisconsin, across the country, across the world, who have the skills to do the jobs that you need filled, to do them well, to serve your business, to help you attract new customers and improve your bottom line. We, as a city team, do have a lot of services and activities and projects and expertise. And with the time today, I'll just note that we are here to support you, to work with you as you go through that assessment tool, the free tool. The link has been provided in the chat. We're happy to email it to you. Our contact information will be on a later slide and shared. But we are here to work with you as you identify where you would like to begin in your journey or where you'd like to continue on, and how we can support you and work together to build that more inclusive business or organization, whether that be from your talent acquisition and HR, your technology, your physical access, and so forth. So it's been a great pleasure to be with you all this morning. We hope to work with you more in the future. We hope you enjoyed yesterday and that you're enjoying today with Minnie and Tipper and our UW-Whitewater colleagues. And we look forward to more throughout this afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.